So Kyle Kelofa is the IFC Senior Country Manager for Ghana and Liberia. Our interview tonight is focused on Ghana. Where have they come from? Where are they? And where do they want us to get to as an economy in relation to their support for private sector and also giving the needed impetus for our development? Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Delighted to be here, Bernard.
How long have you been in Ghana?
This time, 4 years.
Okay.
But
prior to this?
First came here in 1998.
Oh, wow.
And then I lived here 2006, 2010, and then we went to Asia for a bit, and then we came back 4 years ago.
How different is IFC from, say, the World Bank and the IMF?
Good question. It goes back to our origins, okay? And in 1944, towards the end of World War II, the international stakeholders got together and realized they needed institutions to help rebuild Europe and help ensure economic stability, to help avoid future conflict. About 10 years into that, though, they realized that actually for economic development, a key driver was private sector development, particularly for jobs and jobs creation. So that's why in 1956 they created the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, to finance the private sector in emerging markets and developing countries around the world.
Why developing markets and emerging markets in particular? Is it because the finance they need is different from what, say, advanced economy private sector would need?
That was part of the transition, because the World Bank was originally to International Bank for Reconstruction and Redevelopment, to help rebuild Europe. But in the 50s, it kind of moved on to help finance and help developing countries develop.
So you are cousins to IMF and World Bank. So do you run the same cycle with them? So for example, as we speak, we are in the nether regions of an IMF program, extended by 3 months. So do you sort of tie your work to what IMF does and the World Bank, or it's different?
I mean, the IMF, they do their own thing, okay? Obviously, with the World Bank and the World Bank Group, we work together because we're one World Bank Group. We coordinate with the IMF, and we coordinate closely, but obviously for information channels, they have their own rubric, we have our own rubric. But clearly we prioritize some of the key sectors together.
So again, using a specific example, we've received 3 billion from the IMF in various chunks, right? The World Bank will give us sometimes 1 billion or more for development projects, which is what is called development concessionary finance. Within that period, how much would you give us, and what type of money would it be?
That's a great question. Unlike the IMF and the World Bank that are financing governments or the Ghanaian government to be paid by the government of Ghana and the taxpayers of Ghana, IFC, we finance the private sector, both local corporates and international investors. So we're much more opportunistic. And in some countries, in the midst of an IMF program or World Bank program, maybe the enabling environment isn't that great. Okay, whereas in Ghana in the last few years, it's been a bit different in that thanks to some of these reforms and the improved stability or the trending towards macro stability, there's been tremendous opportunities on the private sector. So we IFC, we've seen investors, international and local, wanting to expand or wanting to grow. And so we've been financing a fair amount. But remember, this is important, we are repaid by the investors themselves, not the government of Ghana, not the taxpayers of Ghana, but the businesses here in Ghana.
So if I get this right, your money that you give private sector doesn't go to government debt?
No.
You don't lend to sovereigns?
Absolutely.
You lend to private entities?
Correct. Correct. And this is why governments are keen on collaborating, because we are trying to help finance things, including essential infrastructure, things like the Tema Port. That was done through the private sector, not on the balance sheet of the government.
Because when IMF gives money, it goes sometimes to budget support. World Bank, a whole mix of things, some specific projects, some to government. So you would lend at commercial rate to a viable private sector vehicle in a sector that may not be prioritized by your two cousins.
But it's got to make economic sense. And our cousins are helping to create sectors and help make them viable. For instance, a priority of the World Bank and the IMF in the last few years is to bring increased stability to the banking sector. As a result, we IFC, we can step in and provide financing for SocGen to lend more to SMEs and to women-owned enterprises, or Bank of Africa to lend more to SMEs.
But for the uninitiated, development finance, people may perceive that it should be concessionary. Do you do market rates? I just want you to explain the difference, right? Because if World Bank gives us money, it's obviously we're not paying at the same rate as, say, ABSA would give us the money. Does IFC's rate lie in between World Bank and ABSA, or is the same as ABSA or SG or whichever
What
bank?
we like to see ourselves doing is doing something that the traditional commercial sector is not quite yet comfortable with. Okay, so maybe the private banks are comfortable giving a local corporate a 5-year loan. Maybe we're comfortable giving them an 8 or 9 or 10-year loan. Okay, so we don't want to compete directly. We want to be doing things that are kind of pushing the envelope of what's being done. Are local banks, international banks comfortable lending to the energy sector here in Ghana? Whereas we've been comfortable lending to LMI Holdings to help finance over 100 megawatts of solar.
So a better example of your competitor, or I won't even use the word competitor, somebody in your same bracket would be, say, Badea or AFDB. Are they sort of in the same, maybe Afrexim?
Exactly.
Okay.
AFDB, FMO, Parco, DEG. In fact, there's a whole community of DFIs. And in fact, we try to work together because sometimes we see projects where it makes more sense for all of us to kind of be involved to help move it forward. Do
you do cross-national investments? So for example, there's a ECOWAS highway project. I'm not saying have you funded that, but generally, because you're head of Ghana Liberia, right? So I suspect you do Ghana-specific projects. But there are some projects that are needed that will unlock, so for example, transportation across the sub-region, or say the Inga Dam, right? Things that happen that require more than one country. Does the IFC think about finance that way, or is more country-specific?
I'll give you 3 examples. One is we financed a large scale of our portfolio are funds, like private equity funds, venture capital funds, digital funds. They're regional or Pan-African. And so we might have some funds here in Ghana, like 4DX, but they operate in Kenya, they operate in Egypt, but they just happen to be based here in Ghana. 2, you have a company, say, like B5 Steel,
all right,
okay, based here in Ghana, and we've financed them. However, the bulk of what we're financing is actually financing steel for Mali, for Niger, for around the region. So the region is benefiting by this actual project here in Ghana. But you're right, there are some projects that span actual boundaries. In fact, when I was managing Bangladesh, we financed the cement plant. And the actual cement itself was mined on the other side of the border. And it came across a conveyor to the actual cement plant in Bangladesh. And so we can do cross-border.
But I need to point out there's a difference between you and people like AFDB and Exim, because they do lend to sovereigns.
Yeah. Because
I know a big debate within the finance conversation has been how to treat the debt Ghana had with an organization like the Afrexim, or that should be part of the debt restructuring. So does that mean that even during the time that Ghana was kicked out of the international market, you were still lending to projects in Ghana? I think 2022 into parts of 23, when the country was having challenges as a sovereign borrower, you were still running projects, or did you have to pause because your cousins were thinking of what to do? How did that work?
It was actually a fascinating time because despite what was taking place at the sovereign, the business community saw this as more of a fiscal crisis. Remember, the cocoa sector was still doing, the oil sector and remittances were still coming. So the business sector was still seeing opportunities to do more. And so in fact, over the last 3 years, which includes part of this crisis, we IFC have done more business, over $1 billion worth of business than the previous 7 years combined. Okay, so the business community was seeing opportunities, and in some ways the entire country itself was saying maybe the private sector needs to step up and play a role and build some of these things and create the jobs, since the government can't under the current situation.
Do you have priority sectors ab initio, or is this country specific? Because you did say you are also opportunistic.
Good question. Both. Obviously, we have some global priorities. Obviously, agriculture, food security, and food security is not just food security, but economic security. So we have a global World Bank Group initiative, AgriConnect, to help improve agriculture, including small stakeholders, fintech, large-scale commercial. But at the same time, we like to pitch in and help in with some country-specific priorities. context matters, for lack of a better word. So, and I'll get to this maybe later, but there, for instance, here in Ghana, there's a unique time in capital markets. A unique time for capital markets to develop, to take advantage of the several $billion in the pension funds that can now be deployed to help grow business here in Ghana. That's unique to Ghana, and we look forward to supporting that.
A couple of concerns have to do with countries like Ghana, because of the FX risk. If even our private companies borrow in foreign currency, it's very difficult. So it makes more sense for them to take international loans in local currency so that FX risk is reduced. So for example, in 2021, the cedi to the dollar was probably like 4, right? By end 2022, it was over 10, right? So if you give me a facility of $1 million, whatever I'm producing, I would be completely screwed, right? So how does the IFC think about this? Do you lend in local currency? And if you do both, how do you, I mean, the macroeconomy will make it a very difficult value proposition for a business which is not very strong to benefit from your funding.
No, that's a great question, and countries face this around the world, okay? And businesses face this around the world. I want to have my assets and liabilities match. There's several ways to mitigate that. One is we're increasingly working with banks because they have the local currency liquidity to help leverage their liquidity to achieve our goals, including our impact, including our lending. And so with Bank of Africa and Access Bank, those were not actual financings, okay? But these were guarantees.
All right.
Okay, and so through StockGen, for the support for the cocoa sector, again, that was a guarantee. So the cocoa supply chain is getting local currency from Societe Generale. It's just guaranteed, insured by IFC, and so we're helping to make that happen. That's one way. Two is there are still industries that have large degrees of international earnings, whether it's tourism, whether it's export-oriented industries, both regional and international. Three is, and again, this is where this whole capital market story gets interesting, is that there's increasing opportunities with the macro stability for IFC to help better mobilize local currency, including IFC potentially even raising our own local currency on the market. But what's really important in all of this, Bernard, is not just local currency and foreign currency, but ensuring convertibility. Problem from businesses in a lot of markets around the world. They might be able to make the money, but can they convert it so they can do business offshore or repour their creditors offshore? And I think this is where Ghana's done a pretty good job of, despite some of these fluctuations, the cedi's always largely been convertible.
So a couple of points. Am I to understand that because your source of funds are not domestic, it will be difficult to lend in local currency? Because usually where you get your money from and what the person who gave you the money expects will determine how you can on-lend it. Is that because you have understood the FX risk would exclude a lot of local companies that do not have large external markets?
No, I mean, we are a bank, and so we do have a treasury department that has a full range of tools and instruments to actually enable us to lend. So whether we're working with banks for them to on-lend, whether we're legending offshore, onshore swaps, and through a swap arrangement, mobilizing local currency finance for a local corporate, or IRC potentially issuing our own paper, as we do in some markets, and then on-lending that. And so we are open for business in local currency. It's just a matter of just, the treasury kicking in and the
are you actively deepening that?
I think in this era of macro stability and this era of pension funds having large scale assets, I think there's a very real opportunity to do more in local currency. The rate you charge, so maybe I'm doing a housing project, right? In a place that's supposed to provide housing for medium or middle class Ghanaians, right? Obviously, the rate that I get that financing from the IFC and your partners will go a long way to determine my ability to pay back and whether I can expand. So the question I'm asking is, do you
try to be competitive in the rates you charge to these private sector companies in order for the projects to succeed? Or is it just purely profit maximizing, the widest price you can get?
Well, in the long, obviously it needs to be profit. I'm saying businesses profit maximizing. We're trying to get them to push the needle and to do more.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we see a country that's highly developmental,
Yeah.
that's creating a lot of jobs, or demonstrating, maybe it's a small project, maybe it's a pilot project,
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't fully, if we bring it up to scale,
Yeah.
we'll step up and try to support that for the development impact. I mean, we IFC, we look for the lens. One is it needs to be profitable over the medium term because we're self-financing. But two, development impact really matters. Okay? I'll give you an example. We're supporting here in Ghana, DTRT, Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
Which is
Textiles.
Exactly.
Textiles.
Okay? And which is the most modern international textile operation in West Africa.
Yes.
Okay? On a standalone basis, it can be challenging. Okay? But it's created over 8,000 jobs,
Yeah.
primarily for women. It's located right here in Tudu and out here in Tema. It's come a long way over the last 10, 15 years. It's been challenging from a business perspective. Obviously, we've had to, for a $4 million loan or an $8 million loan, does that cover all of our costs? Probably not. Okay. But it's something that we want to support because we believe in the medium term, we're going to see more such businesses come here in Ghana and create more and better jobs and more business opportunities. Absolutely. And today we're delighted that DTRT has now exceeded the productivity of, say, companies in Bangladesh to show that Ghana can compete with businesses around the world. So from a pure standalone business perspective, did that investment make sense to do just on its own? Maybe not. But to help grow and develop a sector, absolutely.
I like the DTRT example because if you look at competitiveness across developing emerging markets, Vietnam, where you've lived, and Bangladesh would have many more DTRTs doing much, much more. And part of the reason, of course, is capabilities that they've learned over time. But part of it's also finance, cost of finance. So I'm pushing on the finance question because you are development finance. And the only way DTRT can expand to Tamale, to Togo, and to Sierra Leone, Liberia, is if they make money. And there's no way going to make money if the cost of funds is too high. So if you want to spread DTRT to become a sub-regional hub, you may want to make a longer term case for finance to say, look, these guys should not be treated like a normal finance case. Development finance should also be long-termist, and it should also be cheaper, because what DTRT unlocks, with now AGOA expanded by another 3 years, is potentially economic transformative. So my point is, you need to admit the finance constraint on why DTRT cannot compete with Bangladesh, and also have a longer term horizon if you are to show impact.
Look, I'm proud to say that I think we've stepped in and provided long-term finance to DTRT when nobody else was interested in providing it long-term finance. Okay, because this is a tricky business because you get orders annually. Okay, so who's going to give a 5 or 8 or 10 year loan for somebody that can only say, hey, I only have orders for 6 months or 9 months? Okay, that's where I'm proud that we actually stepped in and precisely filled this void, as you say. It's because it's not just pricing; it's access and getting the term structure that they need to compete, and for parallel operations. But I think we have actually addressed precisely as you speak for their need. Now, are they going to grow, expand to Sierra Leone? Maybe, maybe not. Why not just go from 7,000 jobs to 50,000 jobs here in Accra?
Well, because economic transformation also require some sort of scale. And the reason a lot of our countries remain the way they are is because they are too small. And if we look at what our cousins in Asia are doing, clearly scale is a big issue. But we'll take a break. This is the point of view. We're speaking to Kyle Colefa, who's the Senior Country Manager for IFC, who are the world's largest development finance institute. Over 80 countries. They've spent many, many years in Ghana. And we're reflecting on the history of the organization and the potential for them to unlock finance for our development. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the key areas of focus of this institution and also look into the crystal ball as to where they see the country in the next few years. Stay with us. Welcome back. The point of view tonight is speaking to the senior country manager for IFC in Ghana, Kyle Kelofa, discussing broadly what they do, the role they play in unlocking our private sector through finance and advisory. I understand you have given Ghana over $3 billion in the past decade. I mean, invested. That's a lot. Can you give me your top 3 most important projects you've done in the past decade in Ghana?
I'm going to go back maybe 15 years.
Okay.
And I was really proud during my first time here to do the original Kwame Nkrumah FPSO. That was over $1 billion to help show that West Africa can develop properly an oil and gas sector. And most of that money was actually commercial money that we mobilized.
Wow.
That IFC came and directly invested it. They saw IFC's win. They came in with us and alongside us and leveraging our analysis and due diligence and knowing that we'd be standing beside them to help move these projects forward. The second project that I'm extremely...
Is it still working, by the way, FPSO Kwame Nkrumah, do you know? I'm not even sure.
I think we're still benefiting from oil and gas.
Yeah, correct.
Is the Meridian Port. Okay. MPS.
Okay.
And that's just not just any container port. That is probably Sub-Saharan Africa's 4th or 5th largest port. That is such a big port in deep water serving and large ship serving that ships transship from Mauritania to Angola to Brazil from this port. But more importantly, what this means is Ghana gets the ships directly from China, directly from the US. And then our neighbors in Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire, they need to transship. And so Ghana's got a 5-10 day advantage in supply chain logistics and competitiveness, as well as lower costs. And so this is part of that whole, Ghana's got a unique opportunity to be a hub for value addition for the region because of this port infrastructure.
Wow.
And I think the third project is a project that we spent some time on earlier. And I'm biased, having managed Bangladesh, but DTRT.
Oh, wow.
And what people forget sometimes is that this entire textile sector in Bangladesh, which provides over 4 or 5 million direct jobs and 30 million indirect jobs, started with one little Korean company in 1989 with a shipping container and sewing machines and about 200 workers. Okay, so it started at a very small scale, a small scale international company operating in Bangladesh. And so could DTRT be that for Ghana and West Africa? I don't know. Let's see.
Interesting. Some people talk about cotton and its relationship with the textile sector. I don't know what the cotton belt looks like and whether you think DTRT may do better by expanding northwards, because it seems as if the raw material being closer, if they get a cotton ginnery, I think there was a Tumu cotton ginnery many years ago. Well, my point is, do you see potential for growth as we get closer to the Sahel, or for now, let's just see how this is working for?
No, it's interesting because there are 2 strands of thought there.
Yeah.
One is yes, okay, because you do have this cotton, and why send it to the other side of the world to process and make fabric and then send it back? Why not keep it? But actually going from cotton to fabric actually is a bit capital intensive, and takes a lot of work. But there also might be some supply chain, maybe even some branding that could make that viable, okay? But for now, it's more of the traditional model. For instance, Vietnam doesn't have cotton, Bangladesh doesn't have cotton, Cambodia doesn't have cotton. You can still do the textile sector without having your own cotton supply.
Of course, linking it to women picking cotton and the whole value chain, it may make sense in Africa to do this. By the way, these top 3, FPSO Kwame Nkrumah was 15 years ago. Yeah. MPS is maybe 8 to 10 years ago. And then DTRT is also, this is mostly debt, not equity.
Yes.
This is mostly debt. What would it take for you to do equity?
It's a good question, because we're actually IFC keen on doing equity and keen on doing more equity. I mean, our origins are in doing a lot of equity early on. Many years ago, for instance, we had equity in CalBank, okay, and EcoBank. And so we're keen on getting back to that, because that's a lot of the needs here in markets around the world. Equity in particular can help local corporates move up and help local corporates become regional, become international. When people see IFC as an equity investor, then they get greater comfort on collaboration, whether it's market access, whether it's access to finance. And then we're kind of aligned on the same side of the table. What we're actively doing now in support of equity is through funds. Funds like 4DX here in Ghana, or Oasis here in Ghana. So we probably have 20 or 30 indirect equity investments here in Ghana via our funds, through funds that can service smaller scale companies more efficiently than IFC directly.
You mentioned Oasis. I do know they are interested in some agric and agribusiness.
Exactly.
How do you see that sector? Because again, we're talking, agric can be transformative potentially, but for some reason it's not really kicked on. What's the missing link? What do you, I don't know, you've done this for a long time. What should agric think about to really unlock its potential for a country like Ghana?
I may have done this a long time, but I don't consider myself the expert. But what I can share is, people sometimes forget, having spent 4 years in Bangladesh and 8 years in total in Vietnam, they tend to be known for manufacturing. What people forget is they were also very successful in agriculture. Okay, and what Vietnam and Bangladesh have done over the last 34 years is amazing. However, they're running out of capacity. They're running out of workers. They're running out of land. And in the medium term, it just makes sense for this part of the world to be more competitive in agriculture. We have the land, we have the water, we have the sun, we have the people, and we have increasingly even the needed infrastructure. And so we're seeing more opportunities, whether it's large-scale commercial farms, collaborating with various stakeholders here in Ghana, whether it's rice, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's oil palm, or in small-scale stakeholders, small-scale farmers, to help them better link into these supply chains, leveraging fintech, leveraging digital.
I see. So definitely a mix of large-scale commercial farms and also small-scale. Of course, land is a major issue in Ghana. Land tenure is massive, not just for agri, but also for real estate. I do notice you have some interest in real estate as well. Some people say our real estate market, our housing market doesn't make sense to them, all right? There's lots of empty high-end, and then there's like a large missing middle. How do you see the real estate market, and what do your investments show you about the potential for real estate to close the housing gap?
In markets around the world, we've been keen on trying to support more and better and more efficient affordable housing. I'm actually very proud that we were a founding equity shareholder in what was originally Ghana Home Loans.
Oh, really? Wow.
That helped create, and in parallel, we worked with the government to help create the next necessary regulatory infrastructure for mortgage security to work.
Wow.
Okay, which helped create for middle income the idea of getting a home loan was new 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But we're keen also on moving the needle on further down on affordable housing, on a more affordable housing that's closer to the actual jobs. We've been pretty efficient in this, and maybe in some other markets around the world, and we're very keen on doing more there. For instance, you take the Dawa Industrial Zone, okay, which is a unique opportunity that's going to have a wealth of jobs. Maybe there's a need for increased affordable housing there too, which includes water supply, which includes power.
Interesting. Ghana Home Loans was really a great example of focusing on mortgage and housing. Of course, now the company's been taken over by a normal bank.
But it created the market.
Yeah, but my point is there's such a large need for housing, and there's such a growing middle class that you'd have expected more companies to pursue the Ghana Home Loans model. But they seem to have sort of gone back to traditional bank, who still do a lot of lending to housing, but it doesn't quite feel like that pride of place for housing, particularly the acquiring on the demand side. I think there is money for the supply side for housing, but it looks like the demand side, which is where, so if a young person working in a bank or somewhere else wants to get a house, it's still very expensive to get a loan. If it's dollar denominated, there's FX rates. If it's local, the rates are so high. The fact that you were part of it at the beginning shows the vision. So I'm a bit worried. I'm thinking of your reflection on what has happened. Do you think it was a missed opportunity?
No, actually, I think we have a very interesting opportunity now, because inflation has dramatically declined. interest rates are now coming down.
Yeah.
And so there might be an increased opportunity in the next few years on the local currency front. And this gets back to the pension funds that now have several $billion in assets that didn't exist 15 years ago, because they didn't exist 15 years ago, that could potentially be leveraged for some sort of vehicle to mobilize that domestic local currency liquidity for this asset class. We've seen a lot of higher end housing, but we're also seeing them now go increasingly down market. The other area which people sometimes forget, though, is there's the whole supply cost side of the equation.
Yeah.
And this is where we've been spending a lot of effort, is not just cement, but lower cost cement and lower cost green cement, leveraging not cement from the other side of the world, but our own clays here in Ghana that dramatically reduced the cost for cement that's essential for housing. Same thing for steel, for the B5s of the world, that we can support the steel here in Ghana. Next, obviously, are things like glass and other home finishings. So one is the cost of actual financing, but maybe the supply cost too.
Of course. We've seen some cement companies experiment with locally produced clinker, hoping that it will reduce the dependence on imports.
We're financing that.
Wonderful. This is, I think I forget the name of the company, but they have someone tell me. My real question is, there seems to be a lot of cement manufacturing companies, but I'm not sure if there's price competition has led to lower cost. I don't know what your reflection is. There is. So would you say that over the past maybe 5 years, the cost of cement as a component of building has come down?
We're seeing very competitive cement prices, okay? And we're seeing this, the term is calcinated clay. And what they are doing actually is going to increase that competition, okay? And so we're seeing very strong price pressures on
I like the focus on the supply side, because a young man may not be able to buy a house because it's too expensive to build. So if you bring the cost of building material down, whether it's steel or cement, hopefully the company's building will translate some of that into cheaper housing.
Absolutely.
You know, but of course that's not your remit, right? You are just looking to come in and exit. You are not the government. This is the government's job. Your job is to make sure that cement manufacturer has money to put up a cement plant, right?
No, but we still take great pride in helping move the needle and the end product of the cement, whether it's lower cost roads, lower cost manufacturing plants, or lower cost housing. That's
but you track that, and do you track sectors that you support aggressively? So, for example, the port, right? Do you have like a 10-year analysis of what the investment at LMI MPS has done to, say, the cost of imports? I don't know. Is that something you think about in the long term?
We're very proud that we measured the traffic through the port and traffic through the port to the sub-region that we're very proud of.
Okay.
That shows Ghana becoming an increasing hub for trade. We're very proud of that. Now, what's actually in the containers, whether it's steel or whether it's diapers, but the fact that there are containers of goods and services coming from Ghana and going through the region, we're very proud of that.
Yeah. I've heard you comment around things like the collateral registry and its importance for increasing access to credit for private sector, which means you admit that cost of credit is not just a finance issue, it's also issues around collateral and administrative matters. How heartened are you by some of the efforts within that space to make it easier for smaller companies to get access to credit?
Look, we often say access to finance is a symptom and not the actual cause. And so once you get things like proper credit scoring infrastructure, proper collateral registry for both movable and immovable, efficient court system, or alternative dispute resolution systems, where maybe businesses may not want to go to courts for several years, maybe they can agree ex ante on an arbitration, which has worked in some markets around the world. So things like the collateral registry are game changers on enabling financial institutions, but more importantly, individuals in businesses to leverage things that they otherwise cannot leverage. You know, in many countries in the world, you start a business, you don't go to the bank and get a loan, you get a second mortgage on your house.
Yeah.
Okay? And so it's these collateral registries that enable small businesses to maybe leverage things that they otherwise cannot leverage.
You did do something in the cocoa sector. I think it had to do with the buying company. Do you do any things in sort of cocoa value addition? All right. The cocoa sector is an interesting one, right? Generally, what has been your approach to that sector?
Well, the big thing that we've been trying to support over the last 18 months, because there's been a bit of a financing gap with that the cocoa board has not moved forward with the transaction, and the LBC supply chain has had to self-finance. And so we've tried to step in, including with some support from the regulators, the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. We've tried to step in to help the LBCs have sufficient liquidity, but local currency liquidity, hence via local banks. And so we're proud to have provided over 100 million and maybe up to 300 million this year to help ensure that whole cocoa supply chain remains viable, and that farmers at the farm gate are seeing all the LBCs and getting as price competitive and the best return possible.
A lot of Ghanaians complain about Ivory Coast seems to do better, not just in cocoa, cashew, a lot of the cash crops. They seem to have a model that they produce more and they seem to have larger companies. What's your reflection on Ghana's potential there? Because whether it's cocoa or cashew or all these products, our Ivorian neighbors seem to do better than we do.
You know, as you know, Bernard, I've worked in a few countries around the world. I've never worked in a country where they're not sometimes envious of their neighbors, thinking their neighbors are doing better. The reality is, from our perspective, we're still seeing a lot of interest here in Ghana. Okay, by both folks here on the ground, but from around the world. Just last week, I had one of the largest poultry producers in Brazil here in our offices, looking into the viability of, again, this whole regional opportunity, but being based here in Ghana. We're seeing projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars in things like rice, tomatoes, cassava, being looked into here. Now, there are constraints here, okay? But I think MOTI, the 24-hour economy, NIDA, et cetera, are trying to work through and maybe help put some land banks in place to kind of de-risk the land side of things. But we're seeing some very serious plays. Remember, Asia can only produce so much more on the agricultural side. And so when you take a step back and look at the long run, that plate of rice from Vietnam is not going to come down in price over the next 20 years. It's going to go up. Okay? So at some point, that price of making that same rice here in Ghana, if not better, is going to be cheaper than importing that rice from Vietnam.
So definitely we have to invest in agriculture, and definitely we have to prepare to be competitive. I'll take a short break. When I come back, we'll focus on the future. We're talking to IFC Senior Country Manager here in Ghana. He also oversights over Liberia, Kyle Kelofa, reflecting on their work over the past few years and looking at the future of development finance here in Ghana. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still talking to Kyle Kelofa, who's the Senior Country Manager for IFC, International Finance Corporation here in Ghana. They are a development finance institution. They've pumped over $3 billion into various private sector entities in Ghana over the past decade. And funny thing is, the past 3 years, they've spent a lot more than the previous 7. So clearly, they see potential in Ghana. And the sectors are varied, right? Agriculture, real estate, infrastructure, oil and gas, the rest of it. We're quizzing him on how to really use that to unlock an aspect of our development. We do know there's the World Bank, there's the IMF, there's the government and other sources of finance, but IFC have become a very important player in Ghana. So Cal, thanks for staying with us. I want to come back to the whole macroeconomic point, right? The sentiment seems to be that, at least in the past 12 months, things are looking okay. I think the word they use is things are stabilizing. For a finance person, how long would you want to see such a thing before you start getting happy?
Look, trends matter, and the commitment to these results by the key stakeholders matters too. And so what we've seen is in short, very, very good.
Very good.
And it helps create confidence for both domestic investors and international investors. And we sometimes forget about it from a business perspective because maybe we're trying to seek some sort of subsidy for this or tariff protection or tax holiday. Where first and foremost, first principle is simply macro stability and strong GDP growth, inflation coming down, interest rates coming down, exchange rate not just coming down but staying stable. That helps businesses make better decisions and better long-term decisions. And this trend that we're seeing on the accumulation of reserves gives us some confidence that this could be sustainable.
Are all the indicators moving in tandem? So inflation, interest rates, deficit reducing, debt coming down, exchange rate also sort of. How important is the alignment? Because there's a concern about whether the exchange rate band we're seeing will last. I think it's 10 to 12 to $1, right? Yeah. How much time do you need to be convinced that this has become a hard trend? Because it's been a year. How much more longer do you want to see that?
No, it's a good question. I think that the real thing is that it's come down over the last 3 years, okay? And in the IMF program, and you read the semi-annual reports from the IMF, they're largely pretty positive, okay? And that there's the basis, that the reserves, that the GDP growth, and that the expenditures, on the expenditure side, I think, by the government are being sustained. Now, would we like to see more room, say, on revenue collection by the government? That obviously that's also an important indicator of stability. I think that's one of the next steps they're working on. The exchange rate, I mean, when you talk to the business community, some people are happy with a 10 to 12. Some people would have preferred 12 or 13 and just 12 or 13 for 3 straight years.
They just want a number to be stable.
Exactly.
The up and down is too much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we always say that if you, when it fluctuates, traders make money. When it stays stable, businesses make money.
Can you repeat that? When it fluctuates, traders make money.
Yes.
But when it stabilizes,
businesses
make
that
money.
create jobs.
So we want the latter.
Exactly.
Not the former. What about capital markets and things like this, right? Because you also want a diverse range of sources of money. How do you see the Ghana Stock Exchange? How deep is it? How well oiled is it? What's the potential for that?
Look, in 2010, and I think the work started in 2006, but came to fruition by work by both parties historically. In 2010, Ghana created the private pensions. This is the seed that is now bearing fruit 15 years later of several $billion being held by the pension funds, which historically just owned sovereign debt. But now there is a cognizance of the risk of sovereign debt.
Of course.
And so there is a desire to obviously diversify rapidly, and seek alternative assets. So there's money here in Ghana seeking a place to go. This is just a unique opportunity by the stock exchange. And I know the leadership of the stock exchange, alongside the leadership of the SEC, are very keen to further move this needle forward. We've seen 2 IPOs, which is the first in the last 5 years. I think it was First Atlantic, or just public offerings, CalBank and First Atlantic. That's great. Okay, we're seeing a lot more interest on the bond market. And again, it's a bond that a business could potentially raise 7, 8, 9-year money in local currency that may not be currently possible via a bank. And so this is the era in the next few years of leveraging capital markets to help the corporates in Ghana, including local corporates, local Ghanaian companies, access finance they otherwise cannot access.
Yeah. The concern about pension funds, though, is that a lot of the organized labor is very apprehensive what happens to their pensions. And I don't know if there's best practice as to how to use pension funds in a way that unlocks development but also preserves value for pensioners. So yes, we know Norwegian pension funds and Western pension funds do support a lot of good things here, but I'm not sure if there are West African examples of that. I think Botswana does have some good example. There's a lot of apprehension within the worker space when people talk about how pension funds can be leveraged, right? So as a finance person, I just want to talk a bit about what that means, because I see a lot of resistance to that, because like, you want to touch our pensions to build a hotel? No way, right? But I think there's more nuance there than that. So just explain a bit how pension funds become potentially transformative if used well.
Look, this concern is correct, okay? Because obviously this is everybody, it's your life savings. We all have pensions, and we want to make sure that they are properly supervised. And so the pension authority is pretty strong here and keeps an eye on things as far as what percentage of assets can go in different asset classes and what are eligible and what are the required credit ratings. And there's a whole credit rubric there. And this is where maybe IFC might be involved, or our other DFIs might be involved in some of the first transactions, because maybe they will need a credit enhancement to help move them forward. For instance, one of my first projects was in Mexico, to help pension funds go into infrastructure, but they needed an IFC guarantee to make it creditworthy for the pensions, otherwise they were not allowed to invest. Same thing in markets in Asia too. So it's not unique to emerging markets. It's just unique to Ghana because we now have this opportunity that we didn't have 15 years ago. But between the pension authority, the SEC, I think we have some pretty good regulators in place to see this through. But at the same time, you have private pensions that are motivated by sustainability.
Correct.
So they want to make sure these investments are sustainable, which includes profitable.
And of course, transformative things like infrastructure, PPPs, toll roads, and the rest of it, rails, because people are thinking, how do you, there are some investment that can unlock agriculture, right?
But Bernard, it could just be a local manufacturer. Maybe it could be DTRT2.
Wonderful.
Maybe instead of coming to IFC, they issue a bond, and maybe the pension funds buy the bond.
Of course.
And so maybe that's not infrastructure, that's just a company.
And you're prepared to play a role in the mobilization and also the technical work that goes into, because I think the IFC's reputation in terms of the track record will give a lot of comfort to some people.
That's our role. Our role is money.
Yeah.
But our greater role is mobilizing money.
All right.
Okay? That if we are in a company, what we're very proud of is once we're in a company, people that otherwise would not pick up a phone call from that company now call them to work with them, whether it's financing them, to do business with them, to buy from them. And so it's the same thing. So that we'd like to think that some of the companies we're working with, that if we're comfortable with them from a credit perspective, then maybe a pension fund should be too.
Interesting. 24-hour economy is a big discussion in Ghana. Some people feel this is the year it has to put up or shut up, right? Are you in any conversations with them? Do you see any promise in terms of mobilizing? Because they're talking many things, right? They're talking inland transport, they're talking infrastructure, a Greek corridor, they're talking export value addition. It's a major export development strategy, but I don't think it's taking off yet. Are you in any discussions with them, and how optimistic are you that we will see something tangible this year?
Look, with this government, including the 24-hour economy, Ministry of Trade and Industry, obviously His Excellency, we are united under this desire for more and better jobs, full stop. I mean, that's what this is all about. How to create more and better jobs from our perspective for people around the world, but particularly for those of us here in Ghana, and as you know, I'm a Ghanaian, for us here in Ghana, okay? And so we are aligned, okay? So whether it's supporting DTRTs, whether it's supporting large-scale commercial farms, whether it's supporting small-scale linkages, whether it's getting the port to operate 24/7 and clear for exporters, whether digitizing a lot of the regulatory such that when it's digital, it's 24/7, okay? To help make business work smoother, faster, more efficiently.
Is there money, is there mobilizable money for the ambitious projects that things like 24 Economy talk about? Do you, of course, and not talking about IFC money alone, right? Do you see appetite for Ghana? If we needed, I've heard some of the figures we need to operationalize 24 Economy, quite a lot of money. Is there money?
We are doing more than we were doing several years ago. And we are just one of many touch points. I'd like to think more money is interested in coming here. I know we IFC, we're seeing a lot more business proposals than we were seeing 2, 3, 4 years ago, particularly for some larger projects, in agriculture, particularly for some larger projects in infrastructure. You know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, we were looking at solar projects, 15, 20 megawatts. Now we're talking about 200 megawatts, 400 megawatts of solar. This is not just solar power, by the way. This is lower cost power. The lower cost, reliable power for business.
So this money is coming from abroad? The money you see?
Both abroad and locally. Recycled savings locally.
Do you do projects that involve China?
Look, we are keen on supporting viable projects here in Ghana, full stop. As long as they're with credible parties. We're very proud that, for instance, Sunda, which is a low-cost producer of laundry detergent, diapers, sanitary napkins, improving access and affordability throughout Africa with its primary operation here in Ghana, but servicing the whole sub-region. This is back to Ghana being a supplier to the sub-region. You know, they had a public offering in Hong Kong. Okay, so you have investors in Hong Kong financing and creating jobs here in Ghana. That's amazing.
This is Sunda in Ghana?
Yeah, up in Malam Junction.
Because I ask because I do know that because of where the IFC is coming from, there obviously is competition for investment in the company, and China is the big geopolitical rival of the West, right? So that's where I'm coming from here.
I think it's we're all in it together. Okay, so whether I'm financing or whether somebody from China's there or somebody from Norway's there or somebody in the UK there, we're all trying to finance, which is good.
I see. Apart from 24 Economy, any other sectors or any other agencies you see going forward potentially promising in terms of where we should be looking at, where you think good things are going to come from?
I think there's opportunities for more and more onshore value addition. Okay, and I know that sounds general, but the point is, you know, when you look around your house, okay, or when you look around your office or things, you know, we're using here today, there's going to be increased opportunity for more and more of that to be sourced here in the region, but in Ghana in particular, given its unique attributes in terms of infrastructure and stability. So that's where I think that's the future. And so, you know, 20, 30 years ago, how much of the cement was imported? Clothes, diapers, all imported. Okay. Now more and more of that's coming here. More and more things are going to be made here for Ghanaians and for people in the region. And then increasingly, because remember, you have some companies here like including Sunda that are exporting to Latin America, or DTRT that's exporting to the US for markets globally.
Thank you for talking to us and thank you for what you do. Carl Colifer is the senior country manager for the IFC here in Ghana. He keeps saying he's Ghanaian, obviously because he has many strong Ghanaian roots, including his family having stayed here. So yes, what's your Ghanaian name, by the way?
Kweku.
Wednesday. That's the day I was born too. Wonderful. Thanks for watching tonight's edition of The Point of View, coming to you from the offices of the IFC here in Accra. My name is Bernard Avle, and I've been talking to Carl Colifer. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.